Since I remember myself as a kid, I was very curious, getting into places where I shouldn't be. For me to know and to understand how criminals work is very fascinating, it's very interesting. I'm a cyber analyst here in Skill. I'm dealing with cybercrime and terrorism. This is how you get into the dark web. Basically, you can find there drugs, you can find fraud services, human trafficking. The darknet is a portion of the internet which is encrypted and enables surfing anonymously. It's kind of a stronghold for cybercriminals and terrorism. Everything here is sold with Bitcoin, of course, which is not traceable. We are now looking in channels of jihadist Syrian groups, including Al-Qaeda's branch in Syria. They believe in a worldwide jihad, and they are calling for a donation for their purposes. It's like a shop. If you want to equip a jihadist with an AK-47, so please donate, let's say, $400. If you want to donate and equip a jihadist with missiles, so please donate this and this amount of dollars. So it's basically like a shop. I served in Israel in the intelligence unit in the military. I wanted always to know how these terrorists think, how they operate. Of course, if I can, to prevent them doing what they're doing. Telegram is an instant messaging app, fast, secure, and it enables every user to start a secret encrypted chat with any other user. This is what is so attractive for terrorists and terrorist supporters and cybercriminals. So how do I get in? The chat itself, it thinks that I'm one of them. So he lets me in. And basically I sit there and see what they are chatting about, what they are talking about. Inside a pro-ISIS Telegram channel, they posted these tutorials for how to build a UAV to commit an attack in the West. They posted YouTube links, something which are not raising any suspicions at all. In the videos, there are links to the products which can be bought in the UK, in the US. They want to manufacture a kind of a jet missile that can explode into a regular airplane, cause a lot of damage, a lot of deaths. They posted pictures with a kind of a hoverboard. And then the pro-ISIS channel just wrote, imagine what could be with a flying suicide bomber who can fly over walls, above fences, above other barriers, into the enemy's life.
I worked as an economic analyst and a counterterrorism analyst for the CIA, countering terrorist plots, mostly Al-Qaeda extremists, jihadist ideologues. And here in my role, I've helped with our research on an array of illicit finance topics, so terrorism financing. The Ibn Taymiyyah Media Center is basically a collection of jihadist groups that are in Gaza. And I came across them when there were reports that this media center was posting on Twitter a fundraising campaign. They call Jahizona, basically equip us. The campaign was to raise money for weapons, rockets, guns, grenades for their fighters. Bitcoin is an innovation that the financial system has never seen before, where you could transact across borders without a third party, without a bank, without anyone in the middle. So we looked at it, and to our surprise, we were able to see that they had graphics posting the rockets that they wanted, how much they would cost, how much they were seeking to equip a fighter, about $2,500. And lo and behold, there was a QR code where you can donate Bitcoin. We've never seen this before. This is actually verifiable evidence, and we could actually track the funds. We could see that there was actually cash or there was Bitcoin associated with that account. And this, for us, was the first verifiable example of a terrorist organization, designated organization, raising funds through Bitcoin.
The dark web is the natural habitat for the massive and rising amount of cyber criminals. Sixgill will safeguard your data. Our proprietary technology makes us invisible to cyber criminals. We trace malicious activity back to its original sources. We know who's lurking in the dark web, so you don't have to. Sixgill, your eyes in the dark web.
So this is how we get into the dark web, through a special browser called Tor, which hides your surfing data. I'm on the darknet market called Trade Route. Now I'm in the heroin section. I have a short description of the product itself. The vendor tells us when it should arrive, how, like in eBay or Amazon, other customers rank this vendor. This one has 5 stars, so he's probably a trusted vendor. The trust factor is the Bitcoin. It's not traceable. No one knows who you are, whether it's the vendor or the customer.
When it comes to Hezbollah, there's a hand-in-glove relationship between organized crime, criminal networks, cartels in South America in particular, and Hezbollah. Hezbollah sees itself sort of as a resistance group. They have this image that they present as they're fighting against Israel and they're protecting Lebanon. Now, how do they get involved in organized crime?
وشعارنا الذي رفعناه ولا نخشى أن نكرره في كل عام الموت لأمريكا.
Years ago, one of their religious leaders said that it was okay to participate in the drug trade if it's to give drugs or to sell drugs to non-Muslims, so Europe and the US or wherever, South America. So they got involved in that. They leveraged the Lebanese diaspora, which is in Africa, in the Americas, to be able to facilitate the movement of drugs and drug money. So they found a very mutually beneficial partnership with cartels. Key is, how do you move the money? How do you move the drugs? Hezbollah has been able to really leverage its network very well to do this.
And what do they get out of it?
So what do they get? They get money. Money for weapons, rockets, guns, grenades for their fighters.
These terrorist groups are, in my opinion, organized crime. They do all the things that organized crime does. They sell drugs, they move weapons, they traffic in people. Hezbollah is a major drug trafficking organization. They facilitate the flow of narcotics into the United States. During my time with the RCMP, I was an undercover operator. I ran money laundering businesses, fake businesses to launder money for criminals and terrorists. It can be quite boring, actually, at some point. I mean, with interspersed with moments of terror, fear, and nausea. Essentially, your job is to gather evidence that the money that people are running through your business comes from an illicit means or is for an illicit purpose. Let's say we use Venezuela as an example. So, some Venezuelan individuals would come to Canada or the United States, and they would distribute narcotics. These drugs came from Latin America. They come up on a regular basis. And there gets a point where the guys who are selling the drugs in North America are very heavily laden with cash. They've got to get that cash out of the country. So they put the word out through this network. Then a bunch of disparate organizations around the world will say, we can move that money for 15 points in 9 days. And everybody sort of bids, like the stock exchange. And then someone will get the mandate to do it. As for Hezbollah's involvement, the Venezuelans are complicit in the drug traffic with Hezbollah. So what makes these guys any different from regular criminals? I submit that there isn't any difference.
Violence breaking out in the streets of Caracas, Venezuela, as anti-government demonstrators clashed with police Saturday. Security forces firing tear gas as thousands of Venezuelans flooded the streets.
In 1998, Hugo Chavez became president of Venezuela and immediately made very clear his hostility to the United States, trying to reduce the U.S. influence, certainly in Venezuela, but more broadly in Latin America. So he made common cause with hostile governments.
Venezuela was becoming, as a country, a criminal safe haven. Drug cartels were starting to pop up, and that's how Iran brought into the game Hezbollah. My work has been the Venezuelan threat in the United States or in the region. Basically, Hezbollah, Iran, drugs, trade, and corruption.
El vicepresidente del PSV para la región centro-occidental, Tarek El Aissami, anunció que las elecciones internas de la Tolda es el punto de partida hacia el triunfo de los comicios parlamentarios de 2015.
Vamos a salir fortalecidos en el propósito firme de obtener mayoría en el año que viene.
In the context of the Venezuelan-Iran relationship, we found a person like Tarek El Aissami. He was one of the loyalist person to Hugo Chavez, and Hugo Chavez named him Minister of Interior.
His family immigrated to Venezuela, associated with radical Islamic causes, and the word got out that he was distributing identification cards to thousands of people of Middle Eastern background. This drew some suspicion.
He started producing Venezuelan passport for Islamic terrorists linked to Hezbollah.
Y ahora, a prepararnos.
El-Assami became a very powerful person, probably the most 3 or 4 powerful people in the country. His brother, Faraz, was the person operating the commercial relationship for drug business for the cartel of FARC, Cartel de Sinaloa, and Hezbollah. Tarek El-Assami's sister was named ambassador of Venezuela in the Netherlands, in The Hague.
Señor Presidente, excelente.
And that allowed her to establish the relationship between the Hezbollah network in Europe with what they built in Venezuela. Hezbollah take all those shipments of drugs coming from Venezuela through the port of Rotterdam in the Netherlands, through diplomatic channels and through diplomatic cover. And they moved the drugs into the European market. They distributed and they raised money to finance their terrorist operation, not only against Israel, but around the world.
I look at Hezbollah as being probably the most proficient criminal organization in the world, as well as being a terrorist organization. I was in the FBI for 28 years, chief of the financial crimes program. After 9/11, I started the terrorist financing operations section at the FBI. What we've seen has been kind of an unholy alliance between the terrorist organizations and criminal organizations. Hezbollah's got an infrastructure that's second to none when it comes to the ability to move counterfeit goods, stolen merchandise, or to market in drugs. They've got all the corridors that they need. They were involved in trade-based money laundering, and the key was getting into the financial system, and they did that through Lebanon. The Lebanese Canadian Bank itself wasn't a terrorist organization. However, they sympathized with Hezbollah. Hezbollah had agents in the United States who were basically purchasing used cars. And they'd ship the used cars to Benin, and they would store them in Benin or sell them. They had car dealerships or fictitious companies, shell companies, and then they would move the money back from there into Lebanon through the Lebanese Canadian Bank again. This all happened over a long period of time, but it was only in recent years that the U.S. Treasury Department and the State Department took sanctions against the Lebanese Canadian Bank, and that's what did it. That would have put them out of business.
The Trump administration recognized that there was a problem in Venezuela. And they also recognized that in the previous couple of years, our government had ignored that threat. One of the first foreign policy initiatives that the Trump administration took was to apply sanctions on Tarek El-Assami, deny them access to the U.S. financial system. So essentially, it blocks them access to their own funds. It was the first really important step taken to try to get a handle on this, what we think now is a narco state in Venezuela that has made common cause with these terrorist groups.
We are now looking in Telegram channel of a pro-jihadist Indonesian organization called El Aziz Muwahidin. And it describes itself as a charity organization intended to collect money and provide aid to mujahideen, to jihadists who are imprisoned in Indonesia and their families. And its posts are circulated among ISIS supporters in groups and channels. So when I see these kind of things, I always suspect that this money could go to another terrorist activities, not only just helping orphans and widows.
Charities are tailor-made for terrorist financing because there are no real strict rules on the dissemination of funds.
I looked at the CRA report. I did not find any evidence in their statements that they actually found that the money ended up in the hands of the terrorists. If we were sending money, we should have been there on the ground, having proper context and monitoring it. So they broke laws. And I said, this is very harmful for the organization. You will be seen all over Canada as an organization that did something wrong and essentially disserviced all Muslims.
Charities are not businesses. They don't get audited in these foreign countries. Go to Pakistan, they're gonna say, okay, where'd that $10 go? I mean, it just goes. It doesn't always go to the people it's supposed to. Whether it's going to the Islamic jihadists or whether it's going to some gangsters.
Give yourselves a very warm round of applause for showing up today and being part of our reflection on 10 years of service to humanity.
When floods devastated Pakistan, we injected $2.7 million worth of relief, helping hundreds of thousands of people. When Bangladesh was wrecked by cyclones and floods, when earthquakes destroyed Pakistan and Haiti, we were there saving lives.
This is the mentality of the Muslim. We're not here to serve ourselves. Allah made us a nation for the service of humanity. Finally, I don't need a long introduction for this man. Please give it up for the one and only Trevor Noah.
Salam, salam. This is great, here we are, in Canada. Yes, very nice. As Americans call it, Plan B. A total and complete shutdown of all Muslims. What a time. I realized in my life I had some biases I had to deal with. I would always fly on a Muslim airline. I always thought if somebody jumps up in the middle of the flight with a bomb strapped to their chest and is just like, I thought maybe, just maybe, someone opposite them would be like, hey! Hey! What are you doing? What are you doing? I'm going to blow up this plane to show everybody that Allah is great. Yeah, but we know this. Everybody here knows this. So what are you doing? You're making us look bad, coming here, ba, 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 ba. This is not what we stand for. What does Islam mean? It means peace. What are you doing? Is this peace? Huh? You guys have been a lot of fun, man. Thank you so much for having me.
In Gaza, we are the largest international relief organization. There, each time conflict erupts and innocent lives are taken.
Islamic Relief Worldwide, first of all, they denied the charges, said we're not guilty. We will now do an audit to prove to you. And then a few months later, they said we did an audit, and the auditors said we're clean. We tried to find out the name of the auditors, completely secret information, classified. The audit itself was never published. This organization says we're clean. That was not enough for some of the banks that they do business with. We're talking about an organization with over $1 billion in revenues each year. And some of the banks said, we are going to close this account because if this organization is involved in terrorism, we could be held liable.
They're huge financial institutions. You take a couple $1 billion out of them, they'll keep rolling along. And they got rid of a headache.
Okay, right now I'm inside these Telegram groups markets of illegal weapons and military equipment. These were created to help jihadists from Al-Qaeda, for example, and right now we are looking at pictures that one of the members of the groups uploaded of a suicide explosive belt. If I'm a buyer, I will just initiate the private conversation with the seller. We are seeing right now one of the members offering for sale a PKC machine gun, which is Russian-made. Phantom 3 UAV for sale, T-55 tank shells. We can see here that someone is asking from another members of the group if they have Cornet and Tau missiles. No one has answered him yet, but we are still monitoring this.
The people that we're dealing with want to demonstrate to us how easy it is to come across any weapon system you really want to acquire. And one of the commanders called an arms dealer, and he was talking about purchasing some grad rockets. The arms dealer asked for a few days to look into it, and that's where the call ended. But just demonstrating that no one would really bat an eye if you wanted to get some, pretty significant weapon systems.
And where was this arms dealer?
This is in Sebha, in the south of Libya. After the fall of Muammar Gaddafi, the country was awash in weapons. You saw a proliferation of different armed groups, some that came into possession of very large stockpiles. So they started selling off the things that they had in their possession, which are weapons in this case.
We're an organization that was set up essentially to track weapons into armed conflicts and also to terrorist groups. And we work across a broad swathe of countries from Western Africa, across to East Africa, South Sudan and Somalia, and into the Middle East, Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, and elsewhere. Only by being on the ground, physically examining weapons and tracing them back to where they came from, that we can really understand in detail how armed groups, embargoed governments, and terrorist organizations are getting hold of weapons. So this is a Soviet-made AKM assault rifle, a version of the famous Kalashnikov assault rifle. If you take the top cover off, And you can see it has an Izmash Soviet weapons factory marking and a year of production. What we often find, though, particularly with terrorist groups, is that the weapons are sanitized, often quite thoroughly, with markings scraped off or shaved off. But what we often find is that they forget about internal markings, things like the recoil spring guide or other internal components. And so it seems like weapons traffickers and weapons buyers are increasingly concerned, as people like us do our work perhaps, to conceal the origins of their weapons. The tracing of weapons is putting the information in the hands of governments that are trying to understand where they need to concentrate their border security efforts and how to stop weapons flows. One of the things we did was to examine Kalashnikov-style assault rifles that had been used in a string of attacks by Islamist terrorist groups in West Africa. These were attacks against hotels and other civilian targets. And what we found was that the weapons used in those attacks had probably come out of the same box. They were all from the same batch of weapons, the same manufacturer, the same year of production, and the same sequence of serial numbers. In this instance, these were weapons that were manufactured in 2011 in China, and China has declined to provide information about where they sold these weapons. The only way, therefore, to join the dots between them is to physically compare weapons being used in different places and track them back through the armed groups to where they were coming from. And interestingly and intriguingly, they also matched several rifles that were seized from the hands of Islamic State fighters just a couple of months previously in Kobane in Syria. So what we found was that in all of these attacks, right across West Africa and in the Middle East, it appears that individuals associated to these groups were getting weapons from the same West African country and probably purchased off the same individual.
The group, which is now known as Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, AQIM, they're a huge beneficiary of weapons. So that has pretty much armed much of the growth of AQIM and its ability to take over portions of Mali in 2012. AQIM used to make most of its money through kidnapping and ransom. I mean, tens of millions of dollars for one Western hostage. They're making more money now because of drug smuggling, because of the collapse of Libya and that smuggling channels are open, there's more weapons moving. They've used this to get to Europe.
So in the last couple of months, we've been able to see activity by Telegram pro-jihadist members. These groups function as markets for illegal archaeological artifacts such as coin and figurines, which are sold in North Syria. Some of them just say, if you're a serious buyer, so private message me and we can talk about the price. It's really, really hard to know who these buyers are, but the fact that these groups were promoted by pro-jihadist Telegram members, it can give us an idea that the money from this trade could be used to buy weapons or to fund jihadist activity.
My name is Aisha Ahmed, and I'm the author of a book called Jihad & Co. Black Markets and Islamist Power. Smuggling of antiquities has become upwards of $1 billion industry, and when I was in the Middle East, I in fact found myself in a smuggler's bazaar in which I held a Byzantine artifact that was clearly coming right out of Iraq. And I gotta say, the jihadists really know what they're doing in this regard. They pretended to destroy all of the statues, saying, these are against Islam. What they were actually doing is destroying the most obvious ones that they would have a hard time smuggling out onto the illicit industry. Doing that gave the market the false impression that they had destroyed all of them, and so anything remaining must be really, really valuable. So they therefore inflated the price and then slowly tried to traffic those artifacts onto the illicit market.
Art crime is the fourth or fifth largest profit criminal activity out there after weapons, drugs, human trafficking. It's a very lucrative trade. I started working in Syria as an archaeologist in 1991 until 2010. Then when the Syrian civil war turned violent, I was one of the first projects to cancel. So one of the things that we work with is high-resolution satellite imagery that's provided through our cooperative agreement with the U.S. Department of State. We receive reports from heritage experts and activists on the ground who provide us with reporting, videos, and photography. The site of Dura Europos was at its height in the 1st centuries AD. A very important Byzantine-era site, and excavators there in the early part of the 20th century found spectacular archaeological remains, including a Jewish synagogue, which is famous for its wall paintings. Since about 2013, the site has been looted by different belligerent factions in the Syrian civil war. You can see the street network, the grid network of the Byzantine period city with its fortification wall and its towers and its citadel mound. And what we see now is that the majority of the site, the ancient city, has been looted. It's nothing but looter holes, 2, 3, 4 meters in diameter, sometimes down several meters deep. They've had to have found thousands and thousands of antiquities. So what we see in this video, it's young kids, young boys out looting a site, and they're using metal detectors. They find a Byzantine bezel ring. It's a simple find. They maybe get a few dollars for it, but on the market, it may go at the end market for a couple of $100s once it reaches Europe, the United States, or Canada. These kids get a couple of dollars for these finds at the end of the day, and it gives them a way to buy some food for their families. They're doing horrendous damage to this archaeological site. What's being lost at these sites is evidence of the world's first agricultural society, evidence for the world's first cities, the world's first writing systems. Here is a typical do-it-yourself looter who's tunneled into an archaeological site recovering Roman antiquities. Most of the stuff that he's finding here is worth a few dollars to him, but it's better than no employment at all. It's a way for him to feed his family and stay alive. That material was then smuggled by members of the Syrian regime into Lebanon. And the material went out with a lot of other contraband between the drug trade to Lebanon. It'll be loaded onto a boat with other contraband. The material will move to a port in Italy and from there on into Switzerland. It's usually moved by container, by lorry. It's hidden inside other objects, inside furniture. In some cases, they'll cast, plaster sculptures, and they put the antiquities inside the plaster casts. And the end point was the UK, where the material would be laundered onto the art and antiquities market or sold through private sales. For each of these organizations, it's millions of dollars that they're making a year off of this. I've seen antiquities on the Syrian market that if they were in museums, they would have insurance values well over $5 million a piece. I have seen lots of transactions that are in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. What comes back in is weapons and personnel. One of the questions that I get is, shouldn't we maybe buy this material so that we can protect it, so that we can save it? But if we do that, if we're buying it, what we're doing is we're contributing to terrorist financing and warfare in the Middle East.
The relationship between transnational criminal networks and jihadists is very interesting because they're motivated by two fundamentally different drivers. On the one hand, the jihadists are interested in this apocalyptic narrative, so they're thinking about the hereafter. The business community that are involved in cocaine or opiate trafficking, they're looking for their bottom line in the here and now. They're materialists. And so you have this strange mix of ideologues and hyper-materialists coming together for mutual interest.
Following the money can show us a lot. After 9/11, once we identified the 19 hijackers, we were able to identify the banks that they did business with. I told Director Mueller that we would probably be able to identify who was responsible quicker than any other intelligence source, just by tracking the money back. And we were able to do that in a matter of weeks. We were able to take it back as far as Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the mastermind of the 9/11 attacks.
Criminals have known that government is now starting to track the Bitcoin blockchain. Some people are shifting towards Monero, which seems to be more anonymous. Zcash is also more anonymous. This is the nature of criminality, right? You figure out what the law enforcement is doing and you try to surpass them.
You're not going to meet terrorists at the cocktail bar in the Four Seasons. It's not going to happen. They're having these conferences in a beautiful hotel in London or Paris. Meanwhile, there's guys in the street selling, false Louis Vuitton handbags. And that's the guys who are financing, blowing themselves up in a club. Street guys involved in petty crime. The money they used to finance their attack, and the Bataclan Club was paid for by selling counterfeit stuff on the street. Watches, purses, what have you. Our intelligence services have to get back to the street, having sources at street level, common criminals. Most of the jihadists in Europe now are common criminals. These are the people that have to be pursued.